Today we're checking out two of Mackie's titans in the mixer industry, digital versus analog, the ProFX version 3 and the DLZ Creator. Let's check it out. Hey guys, this is Steve from Featherlight Studio, and in this video we're going to be checking out two monster mixers from Mackie. It's digital versus analog. Now, if you're looking for the ultimate podcasting mixer, you're probably looking at the Mackie DLZ line of mixers. They're powerful, creative, and flexible mixers for sure. But there's a couple of reasons why you might want to look at its analog counterpart and little brother, the Mackie ProFX version 3 line of mixers instead. And the reason why is, as it turns out, it can do a couple of things that its bigger and much more expensive brother can't. Let's dive in and find out more. One of the first things you notice about both of these units when you have them side by side is the difference in build quality. The ProFX version 3 line of mixers are built to withstand the rigors of the road with all metal chassis and components. They're fairly compact for their size and channel count, with the ProFX 10-channel version weighing just under 5 pounds. The Mackie DLZ line of Creator mixers is aimed at a completely different demographic altogether, with tabletop use being its primary intended purpose, as it has a completely plastic body, is slightly larger all the way around than the ProFX counterpart. While the all-analog ProFX has a physical knob for just about every mixer function, the DLZ Creator has a gorgeous 10-inch touchscreen instead. While this comparison is not meant to be a fair one, the ProFX line of mixers deliver many of the same features of its bigger digital brother for roughly a third of the price. 4 Mackie Onyx preamps with 16 dB of gain, a great multi-effects engine, rugged all-metal chassis design, 3-band EQ on all the channels, low-cut filters, built-in compression on the first 2 channels, 48-volt phantom power. It can record an astoundingly high 24-bit 192K sample bit rate, dual USB streams for playback, and independent headphone and control room outputs. The all-digital Mackie DLZ Creator is a podcasting powerhouse. It's got 4 Onyx 80 high-gain preamps, more than enough to drive even a Shure SM7B, a 10-inch high-resolution touchscreen, onboard mix agent software and auto mix features, Bluetooth phone connectivity, mix minus options, auto gain channel assistance, dual USB playback engines, as well as dual digital effects engines, multi-track recording to USB and micro SD, custom sample pad playback, and 4 completely independent headphone outputs, and more. One of the biggest differences between these two mixers is how each of them treat their sampling bit rates. The ProFX version 3 line of mixers only has 2 USB inputs to the PC when recording, but it can change its sample bit rate from 44.1 all the way up to 192. And it can be 24-bit, 16-bit in each one of those configurations. This makes for incredibly high-fidelity recordings when used as an audio interface. The DLZ mixer has a 14-track multi-channel interface with the same dual USB streams coming back to the PC. However, its sample bitrate is locked at 48K. This means that it can't switch back and forth between higher quality recording bit rates or to match other client project bit rates. One other important difference to take note of if you're on a Mac and you use Apple's QuickTime screen recording software to record your podcasts or do YouTube tutorials, the Mackie DLZ Creator, as of this firmware, cannot record into that program in stereo, unlike the Mackie ProFX version 3 that can do it easily. The Mackie ProFX version 3 line of mixers has all the connections on the top of the mixer so you can see them easily across the room. The first 2 inputs are combination channels. The vocal channels that at least can accept an XLR inputs are the first 4 here. 5 and 6 can accept unbalanced inputs in a stereo pair, so we can have left and right. This could be any kind of line. It could even be another mixer, for example, or a stereo keyboard, anything that has a left and right output. Or you can simply use one side of it as a mono input. If we choose the left, it'll pan the entire thing straight up. Same is true with 7 and 8. And then 9 and 10 takes an 1/8-inch mini plug, so that could be a phone, for example, or a phone call-in. Or we can choose to return the computer's USB port, channels 3 and 4, back to this set of channels, which is 9 and 10 on the mixer. This is known as a loopback function, and it's incredibly handy if you're going to be using things off the PC at the same time. All the inputs on the mixer are metal jacketed for durability, bringing the total mixer input count to 10 actual channels that have inputs. One of the biggest differences between these two mixers is on the Mackie DLZ Creator line of mixers, all the connections are on the back here, which means when the mixer is facing you, all the connections will be away from you and hidden from view. That makes a nice tidy desktop. And in addition to our 4 inputs for microphones, we also have the line inputs for 5 and 6. Channels 5 and 6 is a stereo connection. Channels 7 and 8, we could use the mini 1/8" connector here, or we could connect our phones via Bluetooth. So we have those two options. 9 and 10 is just an internal channel, so we don't actually have back connections for that, like we talked about. And then we have our main outs here. So that's a nice clean signal, but we don't have XLR. However, we do have 4 independent powered headphone outputs. Next to that, we have our network connections here, and this is to connect to an existing network or to another existing DLZ creator. A lot of power and flexibility there. And then we have our micro SD slot and our USB slot, which can play media into the machine. This brings the total physical connection count on the DLZ to 8, plus the 4 digital connections via Bluetooth and Ethernet, and the 4 USB return streams. Next up are the input channel configurations. We got 2 high Z switches on the first 2 channels. What this means is you can plug in passive electric instruments like guitars and basses, for example, and not have to use a direct box. With that engaged, that basically takes the place of a direct box, saving you some money there. On the first 4 channels here, we have hardware inserts. This is incredibly unusual in a mixer in this price range. What this means is it allows you to use external hardware by simply using this insert jack and an insert cable. So you could use an external compressor, for example, or an external effects device. And then we have a low-cut filter for the first 4 channels as well. This is also very effective for reducing rumble, especially anything lower than about 80 hertz. So with that engaged, that really helps to roll that off. The gain switch, if it's rolled all the way to the right, like you see here, that's up to 60 dB of incredibly clean gain, as all the Onyx preamps are very well known for having incredibly clear and transparent noise-free gain. Each one of the channel configuration options are done digitally on the DLZ Creator, and you do that right here on the touch screen. So you can select each one of the channels you want to work on simply by tapping the touch screen. And then once you do, the channel configuration options are displayed on the configuration page. From here, you can set the channel input gain, and on the first 4 channels, there's even an auto input gain helper, which helps you get it in the ballpark. The last 3 channels are stereo input channels, and they're a combination of digital and analog inputs, and they have some additional features like the ability to switch which USB return stream from the computer you want to hear, or for example, on channel inputs 5 and 6, you can choose that to be just regular line input. Both of these mixers can do what's known as a loopback feature, which simply means when you're returning streams back from the computer. However, sometimes when you do that, especially with a Bluetooth phone call, that can cause an echo in the caller's ear. So the stereo return channels feature a mix minus button. What this does is completely remove that digital echo altogether, so that people calling in on a phone, for example, hear a completely clear and delay-free signal. You also have the ability to load and save entire board configurations or just one channel. These are known as snapshots, and they can include channel effects, EQ, compressor settings, and all of those in one quick preset. And there's onboard presets for certain kinds of microphones like SM7B and condenser microphones. And the last set of stereo input channels, 9 and 10, have some additional input configurations. It allows you to play back Bluetooth phone calls, or you can play back media directly off of a disk or SD card, or you can choose the NDI option. This actually plays audio streams from an Ethernet connection, or for example, an additional DLZ creator. So don't worry if none of that makes sense right now. It just means those additional features will be there in the future if you need them. And the last set of stereo channels, 11 and 12 on the DLZ Mixer, is for the pads. These are sound effects pads that can be loaded with any kind of sample. You can control things like effects or sound effects from them. We'll get more into this later, and then the slider controls the volume for that. The EQ section on the ProFX version 3 mixers are extremely simple to use and very effective. Most EQs, especially 3-band EQs like this, are typically 10K, 1K, and 100 Hertz, which ends up not being very musical. Mackie's done a great job here by making these 12K, which is very shimmery and pretty, and we have 2.5 kHz in the middle here instead of just 1K. So that's a much more accurate way to dial in mids. And then we have 80 hertz as opposed to 100. So these are the most usable. This allows us to add a little bit of shimmery highs to it if we don't have enough. We can back off some of the mids like that, or we can bring it up for a little bit more clarity in the vocal range. And same with the bottom end. 80 hertz is a much more usable range as it's much closer to the spoken voice and gives us a little bit of body to our voice. So this is a really easy EQ to dial in exactly the amount of vocal detail you need in a hurry without having to know a lot about EQ. The equalization section on the DLZ line of Creator mixers are actually an entire suite of onboard digital effects, starting with the EQ. The EQ is a fully parametric EQ, which includes a high-pass filter or low-cut filter. They're the same thing. That can be engaged by simply hitting this switch. And the EQ itself has 3 fully parametric bands. And what that means, if you're new to EQ, is simply that each one of the bands can be placed on any frequency. And then you can change how much or how little is applied simply by rotating this rotary dial here on the right. So these multi-purpose knobs here change depending on the effect that you're using. So for example, right now we're using it to increase the gain of this lowest band. And you can also change the width of the cue. The cue is basically just how wide or narrow you're actually making these cuts. And of course, you can just grab any one of these nodes with your finger and drag it around where you need it. One thing to take note of is if you're using the mixer in any of the modes other than the Pro mode, many of these advanced features for the EQ and effects won't be available. The ProFX mixers offer a simple one knob style compression. On the first 2 channels, we have 2 compressors, and these are great for getting a quick level audio. So as these get turned up and then we get on the mic and we start getting louder and louder, check 1, 2, check, check, check. You'll notice over here, these never get up into the yellow. If we disengage that altogether and turn it to the left, check 1, 2, check, check. We can get right up there really quick. So this is just a really super easy to use compressor. Very gentle attack and release settings on it. Sounds great, very transparent, and very usable, especially during podcasting circumstances. Like we mentioned before, the DLZ Creator line of mixers has an entire effects suite. In addition to just the EQ, we have a fully functional gate, compressor, and de-esser. The gate allows us to actually remove audio completely when it drops below a certain threshold. So for example, when we hit the button here and then we stop talking, you'll hear the gate close completely in the microphone. This can be very useful if you're recording in an environment with a lot of background ambient noise or appliance noise or heater vents, things like that. The next tab to the right of the gate is the onboard compressor. This is far more extensive than the one in the ProFX line. This is a powerful and great sounding compressor with a lot of different options, both advanced and easy. Far too much to get into in this short video, but there's some presets to help you get started, and it's very easy to dial in a very professional sound quickly. To the right of that on the menu tab is the de-esser, and this is incredibly valuable for taking out T's and S's and things like that that are incredibly sibilant. For those that aren't familiar with using a de-esser, this is a really great way to reduce those problems and end up with a very professional and commercial sounding vocal track. The panning and mute buttons on both of these mixers allow us to build a stereo environment. Directly under the effects knobs here are our pan knob, and this allows us to set this channel into a stereo field so we can pan it to the left or pan it to the right. And this is great if we're having things like vocalists or instrumentalists and we want to create a stereo field, so we have a little effect here as well. It creates a little bit of ambience and a sound stage for the vocalist to actually be in. This is very handy if we have a lot of different podcasters and each one of them needs a little bit different EQ and a little bit different effects amount. It's great to have physical knobs where we can simply put them directly where we need them, way to the left or way to the right, and create a less jumbled soundstage than if everything is piled up on top in mono. Directly under that, we have a mute button, check, 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 check. And it's great to have physical mute buttons right here on the surface of the mixer, and it's true for all of the channels. Like we saw earlier, the Mackie DLZ mixer does its panning control under the channel configuration. Just like the ProFX version 3, the Mackie has mutes for each individual. Simply by clicking on it, mutes the channel, and then we have an illuminated button like the ProFX does, but we have an additional feature as well, and these are solo buttons. So if we solo this, it solos this mic and mutes all the other channels. This is a popular feature if you just need to hear or track down a problem for one specific channel. Both the ProFX and the Mackie DLC have very powerful onboard effects engines. Directly under the compressor and the EQ is our effects section, and all of these little yellow knobs send that channel, a specific amount of it, how much we roll up or down, over to the effects engine. It really couldn't be easier. The effects on here are incredibly intuitive. You simply dial up the one that you want, you simply press it, and then send it over to the engine, and you have on this channel that much of the effect. Check 1, 2, check, check 1, 2. Each one of the channels can have different amounts of effects, more or less depending on the position of the knob itself here. And then the total amount of effects, once it's achieved, check 1, 2, is actually controlled by the master effects level. That's what controls all of the entire effects engine level. And the effects on here are incredibly flexible. Some of these effects are actually duplicates, meaning they actually have more than one effect in there. So we have things like chorus, or we have delay and reverb. So if we scroll this over, for example, to 12, and then choose 12, this is actually a delay and a reverb. Check, check 1, 2, check, check 1, 2. And as you can hear, there's actually a delay and reverb as part of that one effect. The DLZ effect sections are all configurable via the onboard 10-inch touchscreen. The DLZ has two different effects engines. It has a reverb engine and a delay engine, and both of these have presets themselves, so you can use different versions of the reverb, medium room, small room, hall, that kind of thing, and the delay also has its own presets. And oddly enough, not quite as large a variety of different choices that the ProFX have. However, if you go to the pads menu and you choose effects, here you can actually dedicate an effects engine to one of the channels. Now you can't dedicate it to any more than one. You can only use one, but you can set up these effects to be controlled by a pad instead. So for example, if we hit this pad, check 1, 2, we'll actually have whatever effect is assigned to that the pad controls. So currently it's controlling this voice effect, and they can be turned on or off for each one of these. So for example, we get a delay on here, and if we turn that delay on and I hit the pad, check 1, 2, it'll actually give you a delay effect. But it's a temporary thing. It's only as long as you hold the pad down. So this is great for momentary effects, things like that. And we could do the same for the reverb. So we could trail off, you know, the end of a sound for reverb, like that. And you can have more than one on at a time. You could actually have reverb and delay. Check 1, 2. And you could have a whole host of them on if you needed them. But they're only good for one channel. So all 4 channels can't use it. I do wish that a mixer in this price range could actually use all of these effects on all the different channels, but for the time being, it's just the 2 reverb and delay for the main effects, and then this special effects section for one channel. And of course, because it's a fully digital mixer, there's a host of other features that really separate it from its analog counterpart, like its ability to play additional media sounds off of the micro SD card or the USB stick in the back, and the ability to save snapshots and presets of the entire mixer so you can get up and running quickly from a previous podcasting session or mixing session. So as you can see, these are both very capable mixers with a lot of pluses and a ton of creative potential in each one. Even though they differ by quite a bit in their price categories, there's definitely one for each price category that you happen to be in. And if your primary purpose or focus is recording a lot of people in a standard podcast environment, then the DLZ definitely has the edge because it's got a ton of digital effects that are going to be very helpful and solve a bunch of problems to you. However, if you plan on using this also as an audio interface, you might seriously want to consider the ProFX version 3 because its sample rate is not fixed like the DLZ. That might be a pretty big consideration for your workflow. Hey, thanks for hanging out, guys. I appreciate it. If you learned something or if this was helpful in any way, please hit the subscription and notification bells. It keeps a channel like this going. Stay safe, be creative. Add something creative to the world. It could really use it. Take care. We'll catch you guys in the next video.